Chapter 5, the nervous system. One of the more popular chapters, one of the more popular areas within healthcare, neurology, psychiatry, psychology. So it's a pretty interesting and fun chapter that we will work on here for chapter 5, the nervous system, neurology, psychiatry. I think, therefore, I am one of those famous sayings that kind of differentiates human beings from animals. Our consciousness, our ability to process thought is all thanks to our nervous system. So we're going to be looking at the nervous system and the root words and pathological terms related to that. We won't dive in too much into the anatomy, but we will need to look at some of the major anatomy of the brain itself and a neuron and how those, and the spinal cord and how that is encased within the vertebral column and the word parts related to that. So let's dive in. Okay. So you have your brain here, okay, the combining forms that mean brain, cerebroencephalo. Remember, the brain is encased within the, let me show you these a few pictures here from my anatomy and physiology class. The brain is encased within the cranium, and it is made up of these multiple lobes that you see here, the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, the cerebellum, bellow here meaning below, and the temporal lobe here in blue. And when we look at, hold on, sorry. When we look at the brain and all of its folds that it has, these are called the gyri. Okay, the sulcus, the deep grooves within the brain, and the folds that we see are the gyri or the gyrus, and part of the interesting anatomical structure of the brain. Also within the brain, I wanted to show you a better picture here of the different meningeal layers. So this is a cadaveric image here of a brain that still has some of the cranium. So you see how the brain here is encased here within the cranium. You have the dura mater still there, the brain and the cerebellum you can clearly see here, and how the brain is nestled and protected here, part of this axial skeleton of the cranium. Before we get into some of the root words for the parts of the brain and the nervous system, I wanted to show you a little bit of the anatomy so you can understand it. And these pictures are a little better than what your textbook gives you. So here in a second, when we learn about the different layers of the meninges, this is what we're talking about. So here at the bottom, you have the brain. Okay, you have the white matter of the brain, the gray matter of the brain. You have the sulci and the gyri here. This soft area here, this subarachnoid space that makes up this cushioning area between the pia mater of the brain, soft mother, and the arachnoid layer of the brain here. These different meningeal layers, these coatings of the brain that help to protect it within the cranium. So you see the different pia mater, meaning soft mother, the arachnoid membrane here that encompasses some of the vasculature of the brain, and then this tough dura mater right here. Okay, this periosteal, peri meaning surround, osteo meaning bone, meningeal layer. Okay, right here. So dura mater, tough mother, arachnoid mater, and pia mater, the different layers of the brain that it is right in here where you have this cerebral spinal fluid that's going to help to cushion the brain. And then you see here the cranium of the skull. Okay, so I kind of wanted to show you a little bit of anatomy first before we dive into the terms. Okay. So here's a colored picture. This is the same one that's on page 101 in your textbook: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, temporal lobe. the cerebellum, bellow meaning below. Okay, this is the cerebellum, posterior part of the brain, that is below the cerebrum. Okay, all of these lobes up top here that you see color are the cerebrum, and this is the cerebellum. So the combining form for that is cerebello. We're not going to get into the different functions of each part of the brain, just more or less just the terminology for it. Spinal cord here, myelo, meaning bone marrow and spinal cord. And you may remember from chapter 2, I believe it was, when we learned anatomical directional terms, how cephalo means going towards the head, caudal means going towards the feet. So they're just reiterating this cephalo, a term here. Cranio, you guys know. And here's those meningeal layers I was talking about earlier. The different layers that act as kind of a little bit like glue for the brain to be held within place within the cranium. So this time, let's go from the outside in. You've got your skull, you've got your dura mater, which is your first meningeal layer, the arachnoid mater, which is your second meningeal layer, the pia mater, which is your third and softest in the layer that actually touches the brain. And then you have your gray and white matter within the brain. Not that we need to fully understand this because it's more of an anatomy class than a medical terminology class, but the gray and white matter differentiate based on the neurons within it, types of neurons. Okay. Speaking of neurons, the combining form for a nerve is neuro. Okay. Neurons come from the Greek word meaning tendon or string. And that's when they first were looking at the anatomy structures with the naked eye. Nerves are kind of like strings. When you look at them in a cadaver, they are whitish, yellowish, and they are kind of stringy to the naked eye. This particular one here, meaning a nerve tract that you're seeing. This one right here is an actual neuron. So you see the dendrites here, part of the neuron that's going to accept that nerve impulse, the cell body, the axon with the myelin sheath coating here, and then your terminal end fibers that make up a particular neuron. Within the nervous system, after the brain, you have your spinal cord that's going to carry that message from the brain to the rest of the body. So myelo, remember, myelo also means bone marrow and spinal cord. So depending on which body system you're looking at, this is a transverse view here of the vertebral column with the spinal column embedded within it. So if you remember back in, what chapter was the skeletal system? I forget. Chapter 3, I think. Oh, chapter 4. We talked about the different vertebrae and how they nestle on top of each other. Vertebrae C1, T1, L1, all the different cervical, thoracic, lumbar vertebrae. The purpose of your vertebral column is to protect this delicate spinal organ here. And you see the spinal cord here within it. So spinal cord, you have your spinal nerves that are going to branch off to form your peripheral nervous system. Okay. That are going to branch off either dorsally or ventrally here and carry that message. So myelo meaning spinal cord. You see the different gyri here of the brain, the major folds of the brain that we spoke about before. The pre-central gyri here, the post-central gyri, the angular gyri. Not that you really need to remember the names of all of these specific gyri areas, but just know that they exist and be familiar with what a gyri is, the gyrus area, and the different lobes of the brain. Some of the terms related to the function of the brain. The brain helps us to feel, to talk. It's our mind, it's our knowledge, it's our fears, it's our passions, it's your language, your hearing, your senses. So a lot of the terms we're going to cover next are related to some of those functions of the brain. So STO here, aesthetics, sometimes called anesthetics here or aesthetics. It is your sensation of feeling. So an anesthesiologist or anesthesia, remember the prefix "an" takes away that feeling. Speech is phasio. Mind can be phreno or psycho. This term psycho does not mean crazy. Okay, it means mind. Okay, so a lot of people get mixed up with that. This term phrenic here for brain can also refer to the phrenic nerve that runs along the diaphragm. Then you have the term nosio here, as in diagnos or prognos or agnos, okay, meaning to know. Mania is the term that means excessive desire or a strong feeling of want, okay, excessive desire here. Kleptomania, pyromania, you may have heard of some of those terms. And the opposite of that, the opposite of extreme want is extreme fear. And you see that here with phobia. Okay. So the suffix would be phobia. The prefix or the other word root with it would be what the fear is of. Okay. So acrophobia, cyanophobia, all of these different phobias. Paresis is paralysis. Okay, when the nervous system is not quite working like it should to carry that message. And then full paralysis is plegia. So paresis is in hemiparesis, someone who may have had a stroke and they're weak on one side. And paralysis is where they're completely paralyzed, and the different types of paralysis. Quadriplegia, meaning paralyzed on all four limbs. All right, your learning exercises, of course. Then we have patient history. Okay, so problems that can go wrong with the brain, some subjective terms that we may use when dealing with the brain. This is a sagittal view of the brain, your cross-section sagittal view of the brain, where you can see some of the internal anatomy. You see the cerebellum that we looked at earlier, you see the cerebrum, and within here you see your pineal gland, the different areas of the brain stem, the pons, and you see the different ventricles inside here. Just some interesting anatomy with the brain. Kind of makes the terms kind of come to life when you see them. So when the brain is not working correctly, a person may have these following impairments. So aphasia, inability to speak. Okay. Phasio, meaning to speak. Dementia. Okay. D, meaning down. The prefix that means down. Ment, meaning mind. Dysphagia, difficulty speaking. Think about someone who has had a stroke and they're paralyzed. They have difficulty speaking, maybe. Neurasthenia here, nerve weakness, and syncope. Syncope meaning fainting or temporary loss of consciousness. Pain in the nervous system. Okay, cephalgia, pain of the head, neuralgia, pain in a nerve, and then your different types of paralysis or pareses. Okay. When you get into the different knowledge areas of the brain and the different feelings and things that can go wrong there, you have your phobias and your manias. Okay, so agoraphobia or arachophobia. There you go. And all of these different terms here are, remember, phobia means fear. So what are they fearful of? Okay, that would be the other word part here. to pyromania, excessive desire, or excuse me, phobia is fear, excuse me, it's been a long day. Mania is excessive desire. Okay, so pyromania, excessive desire of fire or love of fire, and hydrophobia, phobia meaning fear, fear of water. All right. So as always, your learning outcomes, 5.2. All right. Indicate which syllabus is emphasized here. So with paresis here, it would be the res here, or the paresis. Okay. In neuralgia, it would be the owl, and neuralgia. Okay. Aphasia here would be what's emphasized. Okay. I know you've done a couple of those already with your other learning activities. So those are pretty self-explanatory by now. With chapter 5, you know what you're doing with those. Right. And then observation and discovery when it comes to the nervous system. Some of these procedures we've talked about before, as far as CAT scan and MRI images. There's a new one here known as an EEG, electroencephalogram. Okay, electro meaning electricity, encephalo meaning brain, gram meaning to record. So it's not, like they say here, an exact image of the brain. It's more of the brain's activity, the electrical impulses of the brain. Yep. EEG. So it's where they put these electrodes all over the brain, and they're measuring the kind of the electricity of the brain. This is what we call a lumbar puncture, or cerebral, a lumbar CSF centesis. Okay, inserting a needle of the spine to collect some of that spinal fluid, also known as a spinal tap. Okay, where they're trying to tap the fluid in there to look for different diseases, the function of the neurons there. Different radiology terms here: cerebral angiography, myelogram, positron emission tomography. We haven't really talked a whole lot about PET scans, and I wish I had a picture actually. This is a type of imaging that uses radiation that cause you do radiological tracers, and it can cause certain items within the brain or certain areas in the brain to glow. A lot of times they will use PET scans for looking at cancer, and if cancer has spread within the body, using these radiological tracers in glucose to target specific cancer tumors, potential cancerous tumors. Things that can go wrong with the structure of the brain. Here you have an encephalocele. Okay, encephalo meaning brain, cele here meaning fluid-filled sac or hernia. So a herniation meaning a area that is protruded out of its normal location. And in this case, this is a hernia of one of the meningeal layers of the brain. In an infant, hematoma, okay, a blood tumor or a swelling of the blood, a tumor-like mass. Think of a blood blister. An epidural hematoma, okay. This is a swelling, a hematoma located in one of the layers of the dura. Intracerebral hematoma. Okay, this is again one of the wonderful things we love about medical terminology. It tells you right where it is. Okay, inside the brain, right? Below the brain, subdural hematoma. This is a very good example here of the brain being compressed here within the cranium. And you see the brain damage here, that compression of the brain due to the swelling of, or due to the blood pushing up against the brain. Meningocele, herniations of the meninges of the brain, and then, of course, neuritis. When we dive a little bit further into the nerves themselves, you'll see that we have afferent and efferent nerves within the brain. Okay. So efferent or afferent kind of look alike, sound alike. So be careful there. Efferent nerves carry the impulse away from the brain to, or from the central nervous system to the peripheral nervous system. And then your afferent nerves are the opposite. They go towards the brain. So they're carrying information related to the sensory system to the brain. Like, oh, it's cold outside. Okay. Your skin senses that it's cold outside. It's sending that message through afferent nerves to the brain. Psychiatrist. Okay. Psych meaning mind, iatry meaning to treat. Okay. Doctor who specializes in the treatment of the mind. Psychologist, doctor who specializes in the study of the mind. Psychology, the actual study of the mind. And psychosomatic, pertaining to the relationship between the body and the mind. That extra word root there, somato, can mean flesh, can mean body. And in this instance, it means body. So pertaining to mind and body. Okay. So that's part one of the nervous system. Make sure you do your learning outcomes. Make sure you understand the new root words related to the different areas of the brain and the new phobias, all of those phobias that we learned. There's a lot of different root words related to that. So kind of heavy on the 5.2 section here. So make sure you go back and you're reviewing that in your studies. Okay. We'll do part two here in a little bit, and that's where we'll focus on assessment and diagnostic assessment and treatment. Email me if you have any questions.